Jide heard his daughter's voice over the phone and she was crying. He began to panic and asked her what happened. Victoria couldn't speak as she was in pain. The awful news was then delivered by a stranger who had handed her the phone. Unable to believe what he had just heard, Jide threw everything aside and hurried to the scene, his mind refusing to accept what he had just heard. In the bustling city of Karu, a woman named Maureen was a very hardworking woman who was smart, and with that, she was able to build an empire of wealth and a better life herself. She owned many successful businesses, including textile shops, supermarkets, and rental houses, which brought her a lot of money. People admired her not just for her wealth, but also for her beauty, strength, and intelligence. When Maureen married Jide, he did not have much, but he was doing well and was very hardworking. He worked as a chef in a large and well-known restaurant, where he spent long hours perfecting his skills. It was in that restaurant that he met Maureen, and their love story began. Despite their different backgrounds, their love grew stronger, and they supported each other in every way. After getting married, they bought a big mansion, a place they proudly called home, where they planned to build their future together. People around them could see how much love and attention Jide gave to Maureen, and his friends could not help but envy him. He was a lucky man. His wife was not only beautiful, but also wealthy, and she treated him with so much love and respect. Many men wished to have a wife like Maureen, but Jide was the one who had been blessed with such a wonderful partner. While his earnings were small, Maureen's wealth was more than enough for both of them. But that did not bother her because she truly loved him and never saw his financial status as a problem. 5 months after Maureen and Jide got married, Maureen discovered she was pregnant. The news filled their home with joy and excitement. Jide was overjoyed and could not wait to become a father. He cared for his wife in every possible way, ensuring she was always comfortable. He took her to one of the best hospitals for checkups, bought everything she craved, and stayed by her side whenever she needed him. 9 months later, Maureen gave birth to a beautiful baby girl and named her Victoria. Her birth brought great joy to the family, and to celebrate, they held a big naming ceremony. Friends, relatives, and business associates came to share in their happiness. There was plenty of food, music, and laughter, making it a joyful and memorable day. The ceremony was so special that people talked about it for months, remembering the happiness and fun of that day. For 5 years, Victoria lived a life full of happiness and luxury. Her mother loved her so much, always dressing her in the finest clothes, sending her to a top school, and making sure she never lacked anything. The young girl never knew hardship. Every morning, a designated driver appointed by her mother drove her to school in a big car, and she always had the best: education, toys, and comfort. Victoria's world was filled with constant care and attention, where all her needs were taken care of, and her happiness was always the main focus. Maureen's love for her daughter showed in everything she did. She spared no expense in giving Victoria the best childhood possible. But life is unpredictable, and just when everything seemed perfect, fate had different plans. One fateful evening, Maureen took Victoria to the market to buy some ingredients for dinner. The market was crowded, filled with the sounds of traders and buyers. After gathering everything she needed, Maureen and Victoria headed home, driving through the busy road of the city. Suddenly, in the middle of the journey, Victoria started coughing. Her small body was shaking as if she was struggling to breathe. Maureen became scared, and with one hand still on the steering wheel, Maureen quickly tried to find a bottle of water for Victoria in the car. At that moment, a speeding truck was approaching them, and Maureen didn't know. In a few seconds, the truck crashed into their car with great force, causing the car to turn upside down. People nearby ran to the scene, trying to help. Some hurried to the truck driver and pulled him out. He was severely injured, and people around called for an ambulance. When Victoria was pulled out, she was barely injured, while Maureen, however, was trapped inside the damaged car. People tried their best to get her out, but it was too late. By the time they finally freed her, she had already passed away. Jide got a call from an unknown number while he was at work. The moment he heard his daughter's voice over the phone and she was crying, he began to panic and asked her what happened. Victoria couldn't speak as she was in pain. The awful news was then delivered by a stranger who had handed her the phone. Unable to believe what he had just heard, Jide threw everything aside and hurried to the scene, his mind refusing to accept what he had just heard. But when he arrived and saw his wife's lifeless body, the painful truth hit him, leaving him shattered. With tears in his eyes and a desperate tone in his voice, Jide turned to face Victoria and asked about how it happened. The young child was crying as she described how she had choked and how her mother had attempted to give her water. In that moment, all Jide could hear was that his wife had lost her life attempting to save their daughter. It was a sorrowful day for everyone, and a few days later, Maureen was laid to rest. Everyone who knew her had a sad day. Family and friends came together to mourn her, but nobody's suffering was as great as Jide's. His pain slowly turned into something dark. He was reminded of what he had lost each time he looked at Victoria. The love he once had for her began to fade, and little by little, he withdrew from her, unable to care for her the way he once did. All Maureen's wealth was transferred to him, but that did not seem to fill the emptiness Jide felt inside. He quit his job and began to manage a business to ensure his wife's struggle was not in vain. For 3 years, he lived in bitterness, keeping his distance from Victoria and treating her with coldness. The young girl was sad and lonely, as her father never spoke to her or even smiled at her. She was left in the care of a maid in their big mansion, but no amount of care could replace the love she longed for. Every day, Victoria lived in fear and pain, crying often because she missed her mother so much. 3 years passed, and Jide began to feel lonely. He wanted to be with someone, so he decided to visit his village and spend time with his mother for 2 weeks, leaving Victoria alone with the maid. When he returned, he was not alone. He introduced a woman named Rebecca as his new wife. Looking at Victoria, he told her to treat Rebecca with respect, but also warned her to stay out of her way. Victoria was only 6, too young to fully understand why her father had married another wife, but she was happy for him. At least, he seemed happy with Rebecca. Still, deep down, she wished things would change for the better now that Rebecca was here. At first, Rebecca was kind to her, treating her like a daughter and making her feel loved. For a while, Victoria felt a sense of warmth she had missed for so long. Rebecca became pregnant, and it was happy news for Jide. Even though Victoria was young, she stayed by Rebecca's side and was happy to have a younger sibling. But everything changed when Rebecca gave birth to her daughter, Esther. From that moment, Victoria became invisible. Rebecca no longer spoke kindly to her. Instead, she treated her like a servant, forcing her to do all the house chores. If she made a mistake, she was beaten. If she was too slow, she was punished. If there was not enough food, she went to bed hungry. Her room was given to her stepsister, and she was sent to sleep with the maids. She was also stopped from attending school so she could care for the house, which stopped her from furthering her studies. Jide did nothing to stop it. Whenever he looked at Victoria, all he saw was the child he blamed for his wife's death. He buried himself in work, in his new family, in anything that kept him from facing his pain. As far as he was concerned, Victoria was just a reminder of the past he wanted to forget. 18 years passed, and the cruelty only grew worse. By the time Victoria was 24, she was still treated like a servant. Dressed in rags, she spent her days cooking, scrubbing, and serving the family, while Esther, who was just 18, lived in comfort and luxury. She was pampered and spoiled as she was given everything she wanted. Esther enjoyed making Victoria's life miserable. She would spill food on purpose, knowing Victoria would be blamed and beaten. She would add too much salt to the soup and pretend Victoria had ruined the meal. Watching with satisfaction as her stepsister suffered the consequences. Most of the time, Victoria would sit in her room in the dark, crying and thinking about her mother. She remembered how much she had enjoyed when she was alive, and she missed her so much. She kept on wondering what she had done to deserve this, and prayed to God every day for her suffering to end. One night, Jide came home with a large sum of money. He took it to a room that was like a small office for him to work in, and carefully locked it in his drawer before going to bed. That night, Esther saw him entering the office with a big bag, and she sneaked into the office and took all the money. The next morning, Esther left home early, telling her mother she was visiting a friend. In reality, she went to meet her boyfriend at a hotel. Esther and her boyfriend, Samuel, had been secretly meeting every weekend. He often told her that if he had money, they could get a house and live together. Wanting to make that dream come true, Esther decided to surprise him. She pulled out the stolen money and handed it to him. He was shocked and immediately asked where she got it from. Without hesitation, she told him the truth. He looked worried and asked if her father wouldn't notice. But Esther only laughed and assured him that she had everything under control. She would simply blame Victoria. That morning, Jide just left the house without checking the money, and when he came back, he discovered that the money was missing. Panic consumed him because the money was not his. It belonged to very wealthy people, his investors. Fear gripped him as he gathered the family and demanded to know who had taken it. Esther and Rebecca quickly denied knowing anything about the missing money. Victoria, confused and scared, kept saying she had no idea what happened. But suddenly, Esther shouted in fake shock and pointed at Victoria. She claimed she had seen a huge amount of cash under Victoria's pillow in the maid's quarters. Her eyes were wide with false accusations, and her voice was filled with fake surprise. Victoria shook her head and denied the accusation, but no one listened to her. Jide, filled with anger, stormed into the maid's quarters. He lifted the pillow, and there it was, a bundle of cash. His face darkened with anger. Without thinking twice, he beat Victoria mercilessly, ignoring her cries and pleas. "Bring back the rest of the money before the end of today, or you will see worse," he shouted. Victoria begged, swearing she had nothing to do with it, but Jide refused to listen. He never even questioned Esther about how she knew the money was there, especially since she didn't sleep in the same room as Victoria. His hatred for Victoria had blinded him completely. By the end of the day, Victoria was still not able to provide the money, and she was beaten severely. Days passed, and Victoria still couldn't return the money. The investors lost patience and sent the police to Jide's house. warning him that if he didn't pay back the money in 2 days, he would spend the rest of his life in jail. The amount was too big, and even after gathering all his money and everything he made from his business, it still wasn't enough. Desperate, Jide made a painful decision. He sold the house, Maureen's businesses, and everything she had left behind just to pay the debts. With nothing left and unable to afford life in the city, the family moved to the village. Jide and Rebecca blamed Victoria for everything, saying she was the reason for their downfall. But her suffering didn't end there. Life in the village was hard. There were days they had nothing to eat, and hunger tormented them. Rebecca soon made a cruel decision. She sent Victoria to the market to beg for money so they could survive. If Victoria came back empty-handed, she was beaten mercilessly. Meanwhile, Esther continued to enjoy life with Samuel. He promised her marriage, and with the stolen money, they went to big restaurants, stayed in expensive hotels, and shopped for the finest clothes. While her parents struggled to afford a single meal, she was living in luxury, wasting the money that had cost her family everything. Her relationship with Samuel seemed perfect until she got pregnant at 18. At first, she was scared, but she convinced herself that Samuel loved her and would stand by her. When she finally gathered the courage to tell him, he acted calm and assured her that he would come to see her parents. She believed him, hoping that he would do the right thing. But after that day, he disappeared. He stopped answering her calls, ignored her message, and completely abandoned her. Days turned into weeks, and Esther slowly realized that she had been used. The boy she had trusted had walked away, leaving her to deal with the consequences alone. Ashamed and afraid, Esther couldn't bring herself to tell her parents the truth. She tried to hide it, wearing loose clothes and avoiding her mother's eyes. But as her stomach began to grow, Rebecca noticed. When she finally confronted her and learned the full truth, she was disappointed at her daughter's behavior. She had always spoiled Esther, giving her everything. Yet, here she got pregnant by a boy who had vanished. But Rebecca didn't even have the strength to scold her. There were bigger problems: hunger, poverty, and survival. Food was the main worry now. Scolding Esther wouldn't fill their stomachs. When Rebecca told Jide about their daughter's pregnancy, he didn't react. He sat in silence, staring blankly as if he hadn't heard her. He no longer cared about anything. The man who had once been proud and hardworking had turned into a shadow of himself. His days were spent drinking, gambling, and drowning in his misery. His family was falling apart, but he had already given up. Michael, a young man and the son of the village chief, had returned to the village to visit and spend time with his family. One afternoon, as he was walking through the market with his brother, his eyes caught sight of a young woman begging for money. She was thin, her clothes were worn out, and she was quite beautiful, but her sad eyes told a story of hardship. Michael felt pity for her and handed her some money. As they walked away, he turned to his brother and said, "Look at that beautiful woman, reduced to begging. It's heartbreaking." A few days later, as Michael was heading to his father's office, he came across a troubling scene. That same woman, Victoria, was being dragged across the ground by an older woman. It was Rebecca, who was beating her mercilessly, screaming at her for returning home empty-handed. Michael immediately stopped his car and rushed to intervene. He grabbed Rebecca's arm and demanded, "Why are you hurting her?" Rebecca, quick to cover up the truth, lied. She looked at Michael and said, This girl is a thief. She stole from us, and I'm only disciplining her. Michael sighed and reached into his pocket, handing Rebecca some cash. Please, don't beat her anymore. Rebecca collected the money with a fake smile, nodding as if she agreed. But Victoria knew better. This man had only delayed the suffering that awaited her. The moment they stepped inside the house, Rebecca's smile turned into anger. You disgraced me in front of that man, she screamed, raising her hand once again. You made me look like a wicked person. And with that, the beating continued, harder than before, and Victoria cried in pain. The next day, Victoria went out again to beg for money. As she moved through the crowded market, she suddenly saw the man who had helped her before. She saw her too and smiled. But the moment their eyes met, fear gripped her. Without thinking, she turned and ran. The man was surprised and quickly went after her. Victoria's heart pounded as she rushed through the market, pushing past people, trying to get away. But he caught up with her, blocking her path. He then said to her, Please wait. I won't hurt you, he said. I just want to talk. He moved closer to her, his face full of kindness, as he told her that they should get a place to sit and talk. He led her to a small roadside restaurant and ordered food for her. When the plate was placed in front of her, she wasted no time. She ate quickly, stuffing the food into her mouth like someone who had not eaten in days. Michael sat in front of her, watching in silence. His heart was heavy as he saw how hungry she was. When she finally slowed down, she glanced at him with no shame. Michael spoke to her, but she didn't reply to him and continued eating. After she was done eating, he reached into his pocket and handed her some money. It was enough for her to go home early and rest instead of begging for the rest of the day. She wasted no time and took the money. No one had ever shown her such kindness before. She looked at him one last time before hurrying away. That night, when she handed the money to Rebecca, everyone was able to eat a proper meal for the first time in a long while. They ate to their satisfaction, laughing and enjoying themselves. But when it was time for Victoria to eat, she was only given the pot to scrape. The next morning, she left the house as usual, her heart secretly hoping to see the man again. She searched the market, looking around for him, but he was nowhere to be found. Disappointed, she continued her usual begging. By the time she returned home, the little money she had managed to collect was not enough. That night, Rebecca did not spare her. The beating started again. The next day, Victoria went out again to beg for money. To her surprise and relief, she saw Michael. Without hesitation, she ran to him, her eyes filled with desperation. She begged him to help her, to save her from the life she was trapped in. Tears streamed down her face as she told him everything, how she had suffered, how she was treated like a slave, and how she had no way to escape. Michael listened carefully, his heart aching for her. He could not believe the kind of pain she had endured. He promised to help her and even suggested getting the authorities involved to arrest those who had mistreated her. But Victoria shook her head. Despite everything, she still loved her father. She did not want him or even Rebecca to go to jail. She only wanted to leave and start a new life, far away from them. Later that evening, Michael went to Victoria's house. The moment he arrived, he saw Rebecca beating her again. His heart burnt with anger, but he stayed calm. Instead of fighting, he made them an offer. He pulled out a huge sum of money and told them he would give it to them in exchange for Victoria. At first, Jide and Rebecca hesitated, but the sight of so much money blinded them. Without thinking twice, they accepted the offer, handling Victoria over like she was an object. For the first time in years, Victoria felt a sense of freedom. She left with Michael, her heart light and full of hope. Together, they traveled to the city, where she began a new life. With Michael by her side, she slowly healed from her past. As time passed, the two of them grew closer, and their friendship turned into love. Eventually, they got married. Meanwhile, life took a different turn for our family. Esther lost her baby due to a miscarriage. The money Michael had given them was spent lavishly without any thought for the future. When it was all gone, they returned to suffering. But this time, there was no Victoria to send out to beg for money, and there was no way to reach her. Hunger and hardship consumed them. Jide and Rebecca were forced to beg for survival, just as they had once forced Victoria to do. As for Esther, she turned to prostitution, trying to make ends meet in any way she could. Their cruelty had brought them to ruin, and they were left to face the consequences of their actions alone. Victoria finally found happiness. With Michael by her side, she experienced the love and care she had been denied for so long. He treated her with kindness, giving her the life she had never imagined was possible for her. Though the scars of her past remained, she learned to heal, embracing the new life that was now hers.